Hello and welcome to the Future of Universities podcast series. I'm Arno Meerman, CEO of UIIN and your host for today. In the current setting of ongoing rapid change, higher education institutions across the globe have been reinventing themselves and their operations and had to constantly adjust to a new and dynamic nature of the modern world. But is it enough? What we are currently witnessing may very well be the ultimate transformation and disruption of higher education as we know it. Are universities up to the challenge? And what does this mean for the higher education system going forward? In today's episode, we bring you a conversation between Carolin Plewa, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research Education and Development and Dean of Graduate Studies of the University of Adelaide, and Pascale Quester, Vice Chancellor of Swinburne University of Technology. We hope you will enjoy, and don't forget to share this podcast series with your colleagues and leave us any comments you may have.
Pascale took the helm of Swinburne University of Technology very recently after highly distinguished leadership and academic career at the University of Adelaide, particularly most recently as Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic. Now, throughout her career, she received many awards and recognitions by her peers. The Distinguished Fellow of the Australian New Zealand Marketing Academy is one, the Career Award by American Marketing Association is another. And I mention that because, and I have to say I'm slightly biased here, I know that her consumer behaviour, communications and general marketing expertise no doubt will continue to build a great foundation for all of the achievements that are yet to come. So welcome, Pascale. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Carolin. Very good to be here.
And of course, well, a very welcome to everyone who's joining us for the fireside chat. I have to say, I love the terminology of the fireside chat. It reminds me of my first home, which is Germany, and particularly as we lead into Christmas, we used to spend a lot of time in front of the open fire. So I hope that we can create the same kind of relaxed atmosphere and tone for good conversations today as well. But let's get started. Melbourne is slowly coming out of lockdown, certainly felt a huge toll of the pandemic. But of course, the impact has been much wider around the country and globally. How do you think the recent crisis has changed universities in Australia?
It's an interesting question because I think a lot of people are actually putting on the back of the pandemic what was probably going to happen anyway. I think if anything, the pandemic kind of really concentrated the time frame and made everybody jump. But it was probably in a direction and probably as far as we actually needed to change anyway. The higher education sector is not the first one to be disrupted by the digital age. But to some extent, it was probably a sector that was particularly resisting the view that you could actually have good quality in a digital kind of universe, and it was particularly felt by some universities. Others were perhaps more leading in that sense. And Swinburne University certainly was one of the universities that had quite some time ago determined that you could actually do quality education with online. And in some ways, this was actually a competitive advantage in a wide world where a lot of universities were actually saying it was impossible to have online learning working well. For universities that were kind of sufficiently motivated and courageous to invest in online learning, there was a competitive advantage. From my point of view, of course, the pandemic has taken this one from under our feet. All of a sudden, whereas we were sort of proudly cycling well ahead of the race, I think the peloton has just kind of caught up with us. And it is now the case that all universities, big or small, old or new, are now clearly convinced that there is a model with online learning. And in fact, some of that proof comes from the students themselves. They have obviously complained about the isolation, the social isolation that they've suffered. But at the same time, they have commented about the fact that flexibility, the capacity to have things online, the capacity to engage with people in a different way has actually been very positive for their learning experience. So again, the proof of concept has been precipitated on the sector, but I think it was going to happen anyway. It might have taken 10 years. It had to take 2 months.
Absolutely. Now, taking, I guess, that as a foundation, the shift and the trigger to be able to really indicate and I guess transform that change quickly. Where do you see the future going, and how do you imagine universities in the future?
Well, I think, so a lot of people have predicted that now everything is going to be online. It's the end of the universities as we know it. In fact, it's the end of, the world as we know it. I tend to see that this has been a period of intense experiment. And we have seen what worked well, and we have seen what doesn't work so well. And in particular, we have seen the impact on the kind of social aspect of the student's life, and also the sense of disconnect that this has created in a community that should be, created around students. So I think that going forward, what we're going to do, if we are wise enough, is actually take the best of both worlds. So reconnect and understand the social element that comes from being a student at a university, for instance, but also draw on all the benefits of flexibility, adaptability, the kind of scaffolding of learning around the learner, all of those things that really the online experience will facilitate. I think there is another dimension that if we are wise enough, we can capture, and that's the fact that now to be a university student doesn't require being on campus. So the lifelong learning challenge, which we have, I think, all talked about as being a highly desirable evolution, particularly as people live longer lives and experience multiple careers and face the need to upskill and reskill on a regular basis. Actually, that online delivery does enable us to do that, whether or not then those learners want to have some kind of social connection to a university. And, fundamentally, my background is consumer behavior, and I think there is a tribal element to people. And a university is also a tribe. The sense of belonging, the attachment and loyalty that people feel towards their alma mater, all of those things still, I think, are very real. And universities should build on that, not abandon it simply because we are doing things online.
So if I just continue maybe on the element of the lifelong learning, obviously the online component is one of the aspects that facilitating it. Given that we know how important it is, can you, I guess, elaborate on some other strategies or ideas on how we can best facilitate that going forward, much more so than we've necessarily done it in the past?
So I think there was that evolution already, and I think now it's become very evident. But this notion that people come to university after school and kind of have a sequential experience of 3 years detached from kind of the rest of the world, really, as a very kind of cocooned experience in a university, and then they are delivered to the world of work. And it's a one-way street. They go into the world of work, and we never know what happens to them. And indeed, very often, the industry, the employer of those students tell us that sometimes they have to add to what it is that we did in the bachelor context, for instance. So it is my sense, and I have discussed this with corporate partners in the past, that actually we need to co-create the human capital of tomorrow. And in order to do that, universities are possibly not the best place to determine what it is that the industry partner or in fact government as a future employer or all of those stakeholders actually need the graduates to have. And if we don't ask them, we'll never know. We'll continue to think that what we have to do is to somehow clone the model of the successful student of the time when we were students. And obviously this is going further and further in the past, right? So to me, the imperative of staying connected to the future employers and to understand what society will require people to be and be capable of doing, that means we need to co-create our degree and all the experiences that comprise an education journey, because it's not actually all about the content. It's about the lived experience, the capacity to try, in fact, the capacity to fail, I would suggest. In terms of innovation, you probably want to train people to take failure within their stride, learn from it, and then try again, which typically in an academic circle, we don't do that very well. If you fail the exam, that's it. You're a bad student. Go away, try something else. You're not one of ours. This notion of actually scaffolding experiences that the learner will go and grow through, I think that's the key. And if we can do that in collaboration with industry or government partners, I think we will emerge as much stronger, but also much more critical parts of the ecosystem in which we operate.
That makes sense, and I guess I can see the entrepreneurial mindset written all over the things that you just mentioned. I mean, the one thing on the co-creation and collaboration and working together with, I guess, future employers, it's one of the elements that, again, Australia's probably been improving on, but maybe not necessarily historically been strongest in. So can you think of, I guess, any examples or any ideas on how we, as a university, but also as a country, improve our, I guess, our capability and success in this co-creation activity?
Yes, and I think this is something that actually goes through, typically universities are very focused on research. They are in the knowledge business, and they see the development of new knowledge as being an imperative. And very often, therefore, when a university or even an academic, a researcher goes to talk to an industry partner, it is about what they can do for us, right? What money can they give us, or even what project they can give us. But there is that notion that really they should give this challenge to us and that money to us, and then we'll go and do it on our own, and then we'll bring back the result. For me, the epiphany really for this kind of co-creation of the student experience came from discussions with Dassault Systèmes when I was at Adelaide, because initially the notion was that those primes, those big companies, would actually be interested primarily in the R&D potential of universities. Mm-hmm. And it is because those conversations very quickly turned to, yes, technology and R&D is important. Yes, we understand that universities are very important contributor to that. But the big thing that will make or break our business is whether or not we've got the human capital to make this work. And this notion that somehow we thought we were preparing graduates for a particular future, and they felt that they were not getting the human capital they were going to need for their survival, really brought to me home the point that really universities should start talking much earlier to industry partners. And yes, very often they will want the technology and the new knowledge that we are almost uniquely placed to develop. But very often, the value proposition for them is also that we can deliver the human capital, and human capital that is not generic, but human capital that is actually valuable within their context, not our context, which is kind of a bit of a change of perspective that is required.
Yeah, and I guess quite often too, there is different ways of really developing a relationship and partnership, and that might develop through, for example, the human capital element, and then lead to other developments later on as well. Now, in terms of businesses, you talked about the Dassault Systèmes, I guess they've also been impacted by the pandemic as well, bushfires. We've had a whole lot of challenges this year in particular. I guess, what do you see as some of the challenges and or opportunities, I guess, for them to be part of that co-creation? And in particular, what can we as universities or as individuals within universities do to support the business as part of that process?
Yeah, look, I think, this is the old metaphor that certainly in Australia, things need to burn first and then they can regrow. I was reminded when Arnaud made the introduction and talked about, the fireside. In Australia, fireside may not actually have that nice connotation that we have in other places. I think the trick here is to understand that everybody has suffered in different ways. Some companies have actually done really well out of this because it has precipitated their change to the digital environment, and this would put them in very strong position coming out of the lockdown or the economic downturn. I think in many ways what we should take solace from is that the case has been made, and I think won conclusively, that when people are experiencing challenges, technology can be the solution. So, very often we have tended to kind of put things in basket, and, people problems are addressed by people, technology problems are addressed by technology. No longer. Clearly, what happened with the pandemic, the social distance, and the simple fact that people could not be together was a social challenge of monumental proportion. And the solution, we were lucky enough to have the internet and the capacity to meet people in a virtual way. Now, I hate to think about what would have happened if we didn't have a network that was, clearly perhaps not as fast or as reliable as everybody would have dreamt, but still resilient enough to permit some activity to continue that way that it was. I mean, it has been a phenomenal demonstration that that actually society is assisted in very beneficial ways by technology. There's no longer that separation, that somewhat artificial separation, which I think comes even from our school system. You know, kids very early, if you don't like math, then you do that, and then you never go back to the world of technology because you have given up on math. So we need to actually reconstruct, probably from the ground up, the fact that technology is not just for nerds. Technology is for everyone. And if you don't develop technology, you'll work with technology. Whether you're going to be a nurse, whether you're going to be a teacher, you will be working alongside machines. And you will not be as good a nurse or as good a teacher as you could be if you don't actually understand what the machine can do, rather than kind of that quasi-science fiction view that the machines are here to replace human capital. I think that what the pandemic has done is demonstrate just how beneficial working with technology can be for people.
Okay, so do you think then that this sort of pandemic and our way of going through it and working much more closely with technology as part of the process has made us more resilient in terms of future shocks and crises, or what's your thoughts on, or even more vulnerable potentially, depending on how we engage?
I don't know. You know, there is something to be said for the kind of psychological awakening that comes from a crisis such as this one. I mean, people very often talk about the Spanish flu and the decimation that it brought. People forget that actually more people died of the Spanish flu than died in the First World War. That this wave of death that followed immediately after the First World War was much more devastating. And yet everybody's focused on the trauma of the Great War. And the Spanish flu has been something that we've rediscovered when we faced this pandemic. So I'm not in a position to say, 100 years from now, will people talk about the pandemic as the great moment where people realize that, for instance, they were not the slaves of their cars anymore, which would be a great benefit for the environment, or whether or not this is actually going to be, forgotten or dismissed. And people are just going to see that actually the world became digital. I mean, Industry 4.0 was on the card before. It's now become much more obvious and evident to everyone. The role of the pandemic in this, I do not have a crystal ball, but, seeing how conveniently people forgot about the Spanish flu, I wonder whether people will actually also forget about the grand pandemic of 2020.
Yeah, okay. Now, thinking about technology too, one of the elements, obviously, that's always been, at least for me, a big part of universities is the role in connecting the local to the global. Yes, we are very much embedded in our local communities, which is critical, but we're also connecting our students, our researchers, our businesses with the global community. What do you think the new normal does from an internationalization point of view? And do you have any thoughts on how we can ensure that this, role in that international connection maintains and potentially even grows going forward?
That's a really good one. And I'm pretty sure there's more than one CEO of an airline kind of wondering exactly about that same question. If you can actually be part of international webinars such as this one, if you can reach out and be part of conversations and even have a face-to-face encounter with people, although I've got to say my mother is still struggling with Skype. So, so some people are not going to get over that line too soon. The point is then, what is the merit of putting people on planes? We know the impact on the environment that traveling by plane has, in the same way that, commuting 1.5 hours every morning and every night to work as impact on the environment. So there is, I think, possibly in this, the capacity for technology to not just encourage, but actually preserve the capacity that universities have to connect globally, perhaps without as much travel as perhaps our sector indulged or engaged in the past. Having said that, I think everybody agrees that there is nothing quite like an animated discussion with multiple people in a room. There is a special type of energy. And until we go into the whole hologram thing or avatar thing, I think the communication with the screen doesn't quite match that yet.
Now, one last question, I guess. before everyone goes back to their day-to-day jobs, I always think, what are some of the key takeaways? But also, what do you think each of us individually, as we go back into our jobs after this lovely discussion, what can we do to build the future that you talked about and envisioned as part of our roles that we go back to in a minute?
Well, I think the most limiting things that academics tend to do, and I continue to call myself proudly an academic, is that we always try to deconstruct something and find the problems with it. Culturally, the world of innovation, the future, is all about the things we can do. It's not about the things we can't do. And so if we gave ourselves time every day to think about all the things we could do, as opposed to reflect on all the things that we can't do, we will be well ahead of the pack.
Absolutely love that. Thank you, and I'm sure that everyone in the room will feel the same. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for today. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, Pascale. I would like to close by reading the final two sentences of Pascale's contribution to the New Thought book, and they are: "It is therefore precisely because universities can influence and improve the future that they should be cherished by their communities. The indispensable university is one without which no society could flourish." So I will leave it at that. Thank you so much again for your time, and I look forward to catching up at another online event, or hopefully again in person sometime soon. So thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Stay tuned for the next episode on the Future of Universities podcast series. Don't forget to sign up for our podcast newsletter and connect to UIIN on LinkedIn. If you have any feedback or comments, please reach out to us via office@uiin.org.